All right, so with all this talk about Intel 12th gen, we got a motherboard here from EVGA. I haven't taken a look at an EVGA motherboard in a while, actually. I mean, I don't think I looked at any of the 11th gen stuff. So we're gonna unbox it today. We're gonna take a look at what comes in it, take a look at the build quality. This is the classified board, which is one step down from the dark, which we've taken a look at in the past for like Z490. So let's see what you get by them bringing back the classified name, which we haven't seen in quite a few generations. Corsair's new 32-inch Xeneon 1440p gaming monitor has the features you need to play your best. Features like silky smooth 165Hz refresh rate IPS display with 1 millisecond MPRT response time, quantum dot technology HDR400, and built-in mount for either a microphone, webcam, or even a DSLR. To see the complete list of features of the Corsair Xeneon 32-inch gaming monitor, follow the link in the description below. So the box is actually pretty weighty. Which hopefully means there's a lot of heat sink on this motherboard, because we already know 12th gen gets pretty damn toasty. So this is a Z690 classified board. This is one step down from the dark. So for a while there, they had the For the Win, then they had a classified, and then they had dark. Then they got rid of classified for a while, and they only had For the Win and then dark. And dark was actually the collaboration between Kingpin. So it brought in a lot of the touches and stuff that Kingpin wanted to see in terms of making it an extreme overclocking board. The problem is a lot of those features are lost on average users because they're never going to push their boards to the type of capability that they were designed to do by using Kingpin's input. So that's where the classified comes in. It incorporates more of those features than something like the For the Win board, but it's not quite that extra, if you will. Yeah. Okay, the presentation's nice so far. So Accessory Kit, we'll start with the stuff. This is where we're gonna find probably some like NVMe heat sinks and such. Yeah, so you have a case badge. Okay, this is kind of nice to see. So these are the probes that you would get with like the dark, which plug into a header on the motherboard, and this allows you to have hardware monitoring of the various voltages happening on the motherboard. So software voltage readout is good enough for most people, but if you're going for like extreme world records and stuff, software is not nearly as reliable as actual probes like this with a multimeter hooked up so you can see what the true voltages are in real time. So you get that obviously, so that carries over from the dark down to the classified. We have another accessory kit here. This is max thermal pad heights. Okay, so double-sided M.2s and then single-sided M.2s. So this is for cooling M.2s. Unlike a lot of motherboard manufacturers where they already have the thermal paste or thermal pads applied, these, they just give you the thermal pads separately and say, you put them on. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. I kind of like the idea of them not being on the motherboard unless necessary. So here they are. The only downside is you could potentially lose them. This is a Wi-Fi board. So here is the antennas for that. They do have a little stand. They are dual band. The stand is in the shape of an EVGA-E, which I always thought was interesting, to say the least. But anyway, there it is. And then we have two 90-degree and two 180-degree right angle and straight plugs for SATA. So fairly basic what comes on the board, which is kind of nice because a lot of times you get some stuff that you just don't need and don't care about. So here's the motherboard itself. Very heavy, holy cow, very heavy. EATX, no surprise there. Just about every board now from EVGA is an ETX board. ETX board? Yes, I would just call it, ETX, I don't need the A in there. So there it is, giant heatsink cover down here for the M.2 chipset cover. But what you might notice about the classified versus the dark is it doesn't have that strange orientation that we're used to seeing with the dark, where they take the CPU socket and they rotate it, which brings the memory up here, and then they take the CPU power and they put it down here by the 24 pin. So this has a much more traditional layout, which is probably a little bit more user-friendly because it doesn't have any sort of that strange orientation that sometimes catches people off guard when it comes to planning their build. Because if you put the RAM up here and it's real tall RAM, then you could have interference with coolers hanging down and potentially impacting that. So when you have it over here more in a traditional format, it keeps the extra height this way, which means your radiator, as long as it clears the top of the board, will always clear, where if your RAM is sitting here, sticking straight out that way, then instead of hanging down on offset motherboard or cases being able to clear that, it could then be smacking right into it. I like this, it's an actual finned heat sink over here on the actual power delivery. So this is a chunk, I call it a chunk because it's just a giant piece of metal that has some milling in it, whereas this is an actual heat pipe with a heat sink. So power delivery for 12th gen is just as important as keeping the CPU itself cool, because again, if you've watched our reviews or anyone else's reviews regarding power draw and actual temperatures of 12th gen, then you'll know that they've definitely had to increase the cooling capability, the VRM durability, as well as the amount of power phases to keep it all under control. You can see it does have one of those, we call them like shields. Different brands have different names for it. This is nice because it reduces the chance of anything shorting out on the back of the case. It creates this kind of a gap, as you can see, between the PCB and the case. So if any wire does happen to get back there, and it's kind of getting smushed between this, there's nothing sharp and pokey that's going to cause it to have any sort of a short. I think a lot of new builders get caught in that situation where they don't realize they've pinched a wire until their system is doing funky things, like will turn on and immediately click off, or there's getting all kinds of strangeness happening with their system. I've seen that quite a bit. I'm going to peel off the plastic. One of my biggest complaints about some of the EVGA plastic is it's like the individual components are wrapped, and then when they place them all on the board, they get pinched, and you go to peel it off, and it doesn't want to come out from between the creases. So I'm curious as to if this one's going to have that problem or not. So you got to use tweezers to get down in there, which if you're not careful, then you can screw something up. All right, so now that all the plastic's off, so you can see really what its texture is like. It looks very nice on this cover. I like this. My only problem, and I wish EVGA would just stop, just stop it. The yellow caps. I get it, they're a statement, they're quality. But can't you source some black ones? Okay, I can get over the red classified logo. I mean, the classified logo is red. I mean, it's gonna be red. Same thing on the back. Right? I didn't peel the back off yet, but I can get over that. That's small. There's actually a dent in this board right there, which is surprising. I mean, we didn't do that. That dent was already there. The yellow, it's like they go, you know, let's make something beautiful. And then let's just fuck it up with something. And it's like the yellow caps and whatever. I digress. But in terms of lighting, I don't know if this lights up right here. This and this might light up. I'm not entirely sure. EVGA is pretty known for not putting lighting on their boards. The Further Wind board in the past did have some lighting on it. It would have had that kind of a weird design. I can't remember what it was called, but it was back on X299. They lit up. EVGA is pretty much like, hey, we'll provide you RGB headers, but we're not about putting lights all over our board. And most people are okay with that. But what they did put on here though, is you can see a fan header right here that's occupied. They do have active cooling for this heatsink. So I believe in here somewhere is gonna be a fan pulling air through this heatsink and exhausting it out the back. That's kind of nice to see because again, power draw on 12th gen is so big, even if you have a giant heatsink like this, you need some airflow through it. And so there's a fan in there somewhere. Let's go ahead and take off the covers here so you can see what's underneath. For M.2s and such, you get this, which I assume are gonna be spring loaded. Nope, they're not captive, so you can lose those, be careful. Wow, so we got, okay, the heat sinks, our thermal pads are already applied on here. Look at this, we've got 1, 2, 3 spots right there for them. Okay, that's kind of neat. I like that all 3 of them are together. You're gonna have to remove your graphics card to access any of them though, but that's neither here nor there. That's not that big of a deal. So it's worth noting here that the Gen 5 PCI is only the PCI Express slots. And these are both full-size 16X PCIe Gen 5. The NVMEs are Gen 4. So if you were going to be using some sort of a RAID card or something that's designed on PCIe Gen 5, and I believe Intel has drives that are Gen 5, you have to use an expansion card slot for the PCIe slot itself, not the NVMEs. So that's worth pointing out. All right, so now that those are placed, that just goes on there like that. This is why I love the iFixit kits, because they're magnetic. Makes putting these on a whole lot easier. And there we go, there's our board, or our M.2 installed, our Gen 4 on a Gen 4, so we'll get full speed out of that. So now we can just put these little screws in there so now we don't lose them. I like to do this with motherboards anytime I install them, even if I'm not using those particular slots, because of the fact that I don't want to lose them. And then, because the thermal pads are already applied, and these are put on there, That'll just automatically cool our drive. No cooling on the bottom though, and that's what those other pads that we saw were for. But I'm not leaving this in there because I'm not doing a build with this right now. One of the things that EVGA does to make this a little bit easier to access, and this would actually work better in the Spectre than that Asus board that I showed, because this pulls back some. So they have this indent here because they know a lot of cases are not going to comfortably fit an EATX board with a right angle like this. It's going to interfere with something. So they recess it a bit to make it easier to have your USB 3.0 and your 24 pin be at a right angle and still fit in your cases. But if I were going to use this board personally, I would have to find a way to black out those caps, whether I paint them, or something, because of the fact that the yellow caps just absolutely ruin it. And I know I'm harping on that because I'm so tired of playing round robin with which brand is going to come out with a great aesthetic ruined by something's accent like that. Now this was an unboxing and first look at this. We're not going to be firing it up today. If I get a build that comes along and makes sense to fire this board up in there, I'll do that. And this is a high contender right now for my personal build, for my 12th gen personal build. I know I've mentioned this build a few times. I've not started on it yet because I've got a lot of things to consider. We've got some great CPUs coming out later this year from AMD, which might be worth getting my attention for my personal build. I've not used AMD at home in quite a while, but now that they're talking about 5 gigahertz all core on Zen 4, you know, I'm notorious. All I need to do to get you guys upgrades in the market is just talk about doing a personal build. Because anytime I talk about doing it for myself, then all the new crap comes out and then I can't make up my mind. And then the competition really starts to heat up and everybody wins because performance and competition between brands is good. One other thing I want to look at here is the layout of the fan headers and stuff. So at the top, we've got a system fan header right here. We've got 2 CPU headers right here. We have another chassis fan header right there. 2 more at the bottom. This is our I/O right here, our front panel connectors right there. USB on the bottom. 2 ARGBs down here. A standard 12 volt RGB down there for non-addressable. And there's no addressable headers at the top of the motherboard. The downside is because EVGA is fairly resistant to RGB, and that makes a lot of people very happy, their software for controlling it is not the best. So unless you're going to use something like Signal RGB and it's integrated and has the API to work with this, then you're not going to have the greatest of RGB experience with that. They've been doing RGB on their boards now for their graphics cards for a while, and that tends to work pretty good. And so if you've used Precision for controlling the RGB on your EVGA graphics cards, and it's going to be the same thing for this. It'll tie in pretty well and it won't be that big of a deal, but for a lot of people it's just going to be another piece of software that you have to install to get it all working. But what's nice to see is that they have incorporated now a BIOS flashback feature, but I don't believe it uses any of the ports on the back for BIOS flashback. It actually uses this USB header right here. So it's on the board itself, and you can use that as a standard interface for USB if you want, but that's for the BIOS flashback. And then in terms of connectivity, it has 2 2.5 gig Ethernet ports on there. So no 10G. If you need 10G, you're gonna have to install yourself one of those slots right there is gonna have to be your network card. So anyway, there's our unboxing and first look at the classified. It's made a return from EVGA. Aesthetically, it checks all the boxes for me except for those yellow caps. And I bet you we could make a shield or something for that to cover those up. One of the classified boards that I used back in X99 had a big red E, like the EVGA E, and then I actually spray painted that. And it worked fine. So anyway, there you go guys. Z690, a lot of custom boards coming out. They are some beefy designs because Z690 feels like what the old X99 and X299 boards used to be because of the power draw that those Extreme CPUs had. This is 12th gen's mainstream. If they bring an Extreme platform back for Intel, may God help your power bill.